Stop. Don't hit her. She's your mother. The voice sliced through the thick Georgia heat like a siren. Ethan Blake froze mid-swing. Ethan Blake, billionaire tech mogul, founder and CEO of Brightcore, had just been caught in the act of trying to strike an elderly black woman. Seconds earlier, he was coming off a long board meeting, tired, irritable, and under the pressure of an upcoming acquisition deal. The woman had appeared from nowhere, dressed in layers of patched blue cloth, skin like old leather, eyes sunken from hunger. She had touched his car window, then followed him to the store's sliding doors, mumbling something he didn't catch. Then she grabbed his sleeve. He'd spun, furious. "Get your hands off me." She didn't retreat. "Just some bread, sir. I haven't eaten since." That was all it took. Fury rose in him. Not because of the request, but the audacity, the desperation, the closeness. He'd had her moved earlier by store security. Yet here she was again, hand trembling on his arm, eyes hollow with hope. His hand had risen on instinct. Then came the voice. He spun toward the speaker. A young black woman, thin, exhausted, wearing a faded gray maid's uniform, stood between him and the old woman. Sweat dampened her brow. Her breath came fast. But her eyes stayed steady. She held her hands out as if she were bracing for a blow herself. But Ethan didn't freeze for long. His face contorted, disbelief crashing into fury. "What the hell did you just say?" he snapped. "She's your mother," the maid repeated, her voice softer but unwavering. The crowd outside the Buckhead grocery store gasped. Phones rose instantly, pointed at Ethan like an execution squad. "Are you insane?" Ethan barked. "You think you can just walk up to me and spout nonsense?" "I'm not lying," she said. "Just look at—" "No, you listen to me." He stepped toward her, towering over her small frame. "You don't know me. You don't know this woman. And you sure as hell don't get to tell me who my mother is." A few people in the crowd murmured agreement, not with Ava, but with Ethan. "That girl's crazy. Always looking for some drama, trying to get money out of him." Ethan jabbed a finger at her. "You think this is funny? Some ploy to get cash out of me? A stunt for attention?" "No, sir. I'm trying to—" "Shut up." Ava flinched, but she didn't move away. The old woman tried to reach for Ethan's leg, whispering, "Son, bread, please." Ethan jerked his leg back as if she were poison. "You see?" he shouted. "She's delusional. And you," he pointed at Ava, "you're exploiting her." Ava shook her head desperately. "Please, just listen. I can show you the truth. Let me—" "I said stop talking," Ethan roared. His temper, always tightly wound, finally snapped. The stress of the acquisition deal, the long meetings, the endless pressure, the public eyes, it all collided in a flash of heat. Ava took a step closer, trying again. "Sir, let me show you." Ethan's hand lashed out. The crack echoed across the parking lot. Ava's head whipped to the side, her cheek instantly reddening as she stumbled back, barely catching herself before she fell. The crowd gasped. A woman shrieked. A man cursed under his breath. And yet, some in the crowd still turned on Ava. "That's what you get for lying." She pushed him. I saw it. Always playing the victim. Ava lifted a hand to her cheek, blood at the corner of her lip. But her eyes, though shocked, did not lose their clarity. "Please," she whispered, voice hoarse but steady. "Just look at her wrist." "Enough," Ethan roared. "Security, get these people away from me." Two guards rushed over, unsure, nervous. Even they seemed conflicted. Ethan Blake wasn't someone you angered, but hitting a woman on camera? That wasn't something you ignored either. Ava pointed at the frail old woman. "She has a birthmark on her right wrist, just like yours." Ethan's jaw clenched so hard the muscle in his cheek twitched. "I don't have time for this." "You do," Ava said. "Because this old woman, she has been calling you my son since she saw you step out of your car." "Joused, targeting." The old woman nodded faintly, tears streaking the dirt on her cheeks. "My boy," she whispered. "My Ethan." Ethan froze. The world seemed to tilt. The sweat on his forehead turned cold. "Show her wrist," Ava insisted. The guards hesitated. then gently helped the old woman roll up the sleeve of her tattered dress. A small, dark birthmark lay there, shaped like a comma. Ethan's breath hitched. Ava looked him dead in the eyes. "Now show yours." I am not doing." A woman from the crowd shouted. "Just show it, man." Another echoed. "If you're so sure she's lying, prove it." Under the pressure of hundreds of eyes, Ethan's hand lifted to his sleeve. Slowly, reluctantly. His fingers shook. He rolled the cuff back. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The mark identical rested on his wrist. His mouth opened, but no words emerged. Ava stepped closer, bruised cheek throbbing, voice gentle. "I told you. She's your mother." Is crazing. The old woman reached for him again. This time, Ethan didn't pull away. Her hand cupped his face, trembling. "My son," she breathed. "I looked for you in every sunrise, every crowd." Ethan's lips quivered. His knees buckled, dropping him onto the burning pavement. His palm pressed to his chest, as if his heart were breaking or restarting. I almost hit you," he whispered. "God, I hit her." He looked at Ava, guilt crashing over him like a tidal wave. Ava winced but shook her head. Right now, she needs help. That's all that matters. The old woman's body sagged suddenly. Ava caught her. "She's fainting, we need to move." Ethan snapped into action, shouting to his driver, "Get the car, now!" Security parted the crowd as Ethan lifted the fragile woman into his arms. People stared, stunned, conflicted, ashamed. Ava followed, hand still pressed to her injured cheek, limping slightly but determined. Just before Ethan climbed into the SUV, he turned to her. "You're coming with us," he said, this time not in anger, not in disbelief, but in something closer to fear. Fear of what he didn't know, and fear of what he almost destroyed. Ava nodded. The doors slammed shut. The SUV sped away carrying a billionaire, a bruised maid, and the mother he thought he'd buried 15 years ago. Their lives, bound by one moment of truth and violence, had just crossed a line none of them could ever return from. If this story moved you, like the video and drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. Who knows? Someone near you might be watching too. The interior of the SUV was cool and silent. His mother lay limp in his arms, her shallow breaths barely lifting her chest. Her skin, paper-thin and worn, seemed almost translucent under the filtered light from the tinted windows. Ava sat across from him, clutching the side panel with one hand, the other holding a napkin against her bleeding lip. Her face was bruised. Her gaze was unreadable. Ethan tried not to look at her. He couldn't. Every time he did, he saw his hand, his fury, his failure. "Hospital?" The driver called from the front. "Yes, nearest trauma unit," Ethan replied hoarsely. The SUV surged forward. Ethan looked down at the old woman, at the woman he had nearly struck. The woman he'd called a liar. She looked so small now. Her gray head rested against his shoulder, her breath rattling. Her hand, brittle and dry, clutched his shirt like a child clings to a parent. He lowered his voice. "Mama." Her eyelids fluttered, but she didn't answer. He turned toward Ava. "That thing you said. About the birthmark. How did you know?" How did you know?" "I saw it on her wrist," Ava replied softly, her voice rough from pain. "And I remembered seeing it on yours once. In a magazine photo. Years ago." "That's it? You saw a mark and assumed she was my mother?" Ava didn't flinch. It wasn't just the mark. It was her eyes. The way she looked at you, like she was seeing someone she'd been searching for her whole life. Ethan rubbed his temples. "Jesus Christ. She said your name before you spoke to her," Ava added. "She didn't beg. She called you, my son." He looked at her, finally really looked at her. "You stood in front of me. You got hurt. For this." "She was about to be hurt worse," Ava said, shrugging slightly. Ethan swallowed hard. He had built a billion-dollar tech company, negotiated contracts with governments and Fortune 500 seconds, but nothing had ever made him feel as small as he did now. His voice broke. "I hit you." "I've had worse," Ava said. "That's not an excuse." Silence. Outside, Atlanta blurred by in a rush of billboards, trees, and stoplights. Ethan looked down again at his mother. She disappeared 15 years ago. I thought she was dead. We searched. Police, detectives, even private firms. She was just gone. Ava nodded slowly. Then she wasn't meant to be found. Not until now. The SUV pulled into the emergency entrance of Piedmont Atlanta Hospital. Nurses with a gurney met them before the car even stopped moving. "She's not breathing properly," Ethan shouted as he carried his mother out. They laid her down, oxygen tubes already in place. "This way, sir," a nurse barked. Ava trailed behind, unnoticed by most, barefoot and bloodied, but focused. Inside the trauma unit, doctors and nurses worked quickly. Vitals, IV lines, monitors. The beeping and shouting became a chaotic melody of urgency. Ethan stood beside the bed, helpless. For all his power, he was now just a son watching his mother disappear again. A nurse tried to move him. "Sir, we need space." "I'm not leaving her," he snapped. Then Ava appeared at his side, her hand lightly touching his arm. "Let them work," she said, her voice low but firm. He turned to her. "I can't lose her again." "You won't," she said. "But she needs more than your guilt right now." Ethan nodded, stepping back with a reluctant breath. The door shut. He was left staring through the glass. Ava sat on a bench, the fluorescent lights casting stark shadows on her bruised face. Her hands shook slightly as she folded them in her lap. "I'm sorry," Ethan said after a long silence. She didn't look at him. "I know. I don't know what happened to me out there. I saw red. I didn't even see you as a person. That's not who I want to be." "You were protecting yourself," she said, in the worst way possible. Ethan paced, fists clenched. The door opened. A tall doctor in scrubs stepped out, removing his gloves. Ethan rushed forward. "Is she okay?" "She's stable for now," the doctor said, "but malnourished, dehydrated, signs of long-term trauma. Her wrists have markings, possibly from restraints." Ethan's eyes darkened. "What kind of restraints?" "Old bruising. Possibly chains. She's been through something terrible. We'll run full diagnostics, but right now, rest is what she needs." Ethan nodded, trying to swallow the rage that rose in his throat. The doctor placed a hand on his shoulder. "She called your name as she was fading. She remembers you." When the doctor left, Ethan turned to Ava. Who would do this to her? Ava's gaze met his. Someone who didn't want her found. His fists clenched, his jaw tightened. He whispered, "Then we find them." She studied him. What if the truth is worse than the silence? "I don't care," Ethan said. "I've lived 15 years with an empty coffin. I want answers." Just then, a nurse walked out holding a small cloth bundle. "Mr. Blake?" she asked. Ethan stepped forward. This was inside her dress pocket, she said, unwrapping it. Inside lay a single, rusted chain link, small, but unmistakably part of a shackle. Ethan stared at it, expressionless. "She kept it," Ava whispered. "All this time, as proof." Ethan nodded slowly. "Then whoever did this is still out there." Ava met his eyes. "And they'll know you found her." Ethan looked down at the chain, then back toward the room where his mother lay. "This isn't over," he said. His voice was low, steady, and terrifyingly clear. The automatic doors hissed open as Ethan and Ava stepped back into the trauma ward. The sterile smell of antiseptic pushed against them like a cold wall. Nurses moved swiftly around Mama Ruth's bed, adjusting tubes, checking monitors, calling out numbers Ethan couldn't make sense of. He stood there, rigid, every muscle locked, afraid that if he blinked, she would vanish again just as she had 15 years ago. The monitor beeped in slow, uneven intervals, each one a knife twisting in his chest. Inside the room, a nurse lifted Mama Ruth's fragile wrist to place an identification band. Ava leaned closer, watching the tremor in the nurse's hand as she noticed the faint rings of bruising around the bone. "She must have been restrained," the nurse murmured softly. Ethan heard it. His knuckles whitened as he gripped the rail. Restrained? What does that even mean? Who would restrain an elderly woman, my mother? The nurse hesitated, glancing at the doctor for permission. He stepped forward. "Mr. Blake, please understand, whatever your mother endured, It lasted years. The malnutrition, the injuries, the infection in her arm. He sighed, lowering his voice. This wasn't homelessness. This was captivity. The words hit Ethan harder than his worst business loss. Harder than the night he buried an empty coffin engraved with her name. It can't be, he whispered. We looked for her everywhere. Police, private investigators, how could she be held somewhere for 15 years and no one know? Ava stepped closer. Her voice, even through the swelling in her cheek, was gentle. Someone made sure she stayed hidden. Ethan turned to her, guilt crawling up his throat again. I hurt you, and you're still helping me. You were angry, she said simply. I've seen worse from men who had far less reason. He winced, unable to look at her bruised face for more than a second. That's not an excuse. Maybe not, she said. But right now, your mother needs you focused, not drowning in shame. Ethan swallowed hard. I don't deserve her forgiveness. Or yours. Ava didn't answer. Her eyes drifted toward Mama Ruth, whose breaths were still irregular, shallow, fragile as torn paper. A moment later, a nurse invited them back inside. Mama Ruth lay under a thin hospital blanket, her face pale against the white pillow. The tubes and wires made her look impossibly small. Ethan walked slowly to her bedside, each step heavy with 15 years of grief. He took her hand, shocked by how light it felt in his. Mama, he whispered. Can you hear me? Her eyelids fluttered. Ava stood near the foot of the bed, hands clasped tightly, silently urging the woman to wake. Mama, it's me. It's Ethan. His voice cracked on his own name. I'm here. I'm not losing you again. The old woman's lips trembled. My boy. Ethan collapsed forward, pressing her hand against his forehead. I'm sorry, he whispered. I'm so sorry. I thought you were gone. I had no idea you were out there suffering. I failed you. Her hand twitched weakly, brushing his cheek. No. My son. You are here. A cough shook her frail body. A nurse hurried forward to steady her. Ethan stepped aside, terrified that even his presence might hurt her. The doctor looked at him. She's conscious, but we must keep her calm. Her heart is extremely weak. Mama Ruth's eyes drifted toward Ava. You, she whispered. Ava stepped forward, startled. Yes, ma'am. I'm here. The old woman's eyes warmed. You stopped him from sin. Ava swallowed the lump forming in her throat. I only wanted to protect you. A faint smile cracked through the deep lines of Mama Ruth's face. God sent you. Ethan blinked hard, tears filling his eyes. He did, he said, voice trembling. Even when I didn't deserve it. Aster. Mama Ruth's gaze moved to the small cloth bundle sitting on the bedside table, the rusted chain link. Her eyes darkened. She reached toward it with trembling fingers. Ava quickly handed it to her. Ethan watched, his heart thudding painfully. Mama, what is that? Why did you keep it? Her breath quivered. Proof. Ethan leaned closer. Proof of what? Her voice was barely a whisper. The man who took me. Silence gripped the room. Even the machines seemed to hush. Ava froze. Ethan straightened slowly, dread chilling him from the spine outward. The man, he repeated, his voice shaking. Someone took you? Mama? Who? Her eyes filled with tears, fear, grief, memory all tangled together. Someone, close. Ethan felt the floor tilt beneath him. Close? Who? But her strength ran out. Her eyes shut, her hand falling limp against the sheets. Alarms beeped. Nurses rushed forward. She's losing consciousness. Ethan stepped back, horror spreading across his face. Mama! Mama! Stay with me! A nurse gently pushed him aside. Sir, please let us work. Ava grabbed Ethan's arm before he could lunge forward again. Let them help her, she said firmly. She'll come back. She will. Ethan's chest heaved with a choked sob. She can't leave again. She just got back. Ava steadied him, even as her own knees shook. Hope isn't gentle, Ethan. It hurts before it heals. He looked at her, eyes wet. Why are you still here, after everything I did? She met his gaze without blinking. Because your mother deserves someone in the room who won't lose their head. And right now, that's not you. His breath caught not in anger, but in the quiet realization that she was right. Minutes felt like hours. Finally, the doctor stepped out, removing his gloves. She's stable again, but she needs rest. You both should get some water and sit down. Isline. Ava let out a shaky breath and gently guided Ethan toward the waiting area. He followed her like a man walking through fog. Once seated, Ethan pressed his hands over his face. I need to know, he whispered. Who took her? Who kept her hidden? Someone close. Someone who betrayed us. Ava looked at him, the bruising on her cheek beginning to darken. We'll find out, she said softly. But not with rage, with truth. He looked up at her, and for the first time, he truly understood. This girl bleeding, exhausted. Half his size had more strength in her steady gaze than he had in all his wealth. Thank you, he said quietly. Ava lowered her eyes. We're not done yet. Her voice was soft, but it carried the weight of a promise. Night settled over the hospital like a heavy blanket, dimming the hallways into long stretches of muted gold and shadow. The bustle of the trauma unit had softened into a low hum, machines beeping steadily. Rubber soles whispering across waxed floors. Distant conversations slipping through partially open doors. Yet for Ethan Blake, the world was nothing but a narrowing tunnel. The glass window between him and the room where his mother fought for breath. He stood there unmoving, forehead nearly touching the glass, hands pressed against it as if he were holding himself upright. Exhaustion weighed on him, not the kind born from board meetings or billion-dollar negotiations, but the kind that sinks into bone, an exhaustion made of fear, guilt, and 15 stolen years. Behind him, Ava slipped quietly into the waiting area with 2 paper cups of lukewarm hospital coffee. Her lip was split, her cheek swollen, but she moved with a determined steadiness. You should drink something, she said softly. He didn't turn. I'm fine. You're not. People who are fine don't shake like that. He glanced down. His hands were trembling. Ava stepped beside him, offering the coffee. He hesitated, then took it, though it barely touched his lips. The room beyond the glass was calmer now. Nurses had dimmed the lights around Mama Ruth, letting her rest. She lay on her side, an oxygen line threading gently beneath her nose, her chest rising and falling with shallow rhythm. Ethan swallowed hard. She looked so fragile. Ava nodded. But she came back from something no one should survive. Fragile doesn't mean weak. He almost smiled at that. Almost. A long moment passed before he spoke again. You saved her. No, Ava said. I stopped you from hurting her. That's all. That isn't all. His voice cracked slightly. If you hadn't stepped in, if you hadn't insisted, I insisted because I saw something, she said. Not just the birthmark. Her face. Yours. There was a story there, waiting for someone to say it out loud. He looked at her bruised cheek, a hot wave of guilt rising again. And I hit you for it, she shrugged. You hit out of fear and anger. People make terrible decisions when they're cornered. That's not comforting. It's not meant to be. It's just the truth. He let out a slow breath, something between a sigh and acceptance. Then he looked back into the room. I don't understand how she survived, he murmured. If she was taken, if she was hurt, she held on because she believed she'd see you again, Ava said quietly. Some people live on hope longer than they can live on food. He turned fully toward her now. How do you know things like that? Pain teaches, she replied simply. Just then, the door at the far end of the hall clicked open. A janitor entered, an older black man with gray in his beard, wearing a dark green maintenance uniform. He moved with the weary familiarity of someone who had seen too many tragedies, too many stories play out inside hospital walls. He carried a mop bucket and pushed it slowly across the floor until he reached Ethan and Ava. He paused, eyes shifting to the window behind them, the room where Mama Ruth slept. You're her boy, aren't you? He said quietly. Ethan stiffened. Do I know you? The man shook his head. No, sir. But I knew her. Long time ago. Ava stepped closer. How? He glanced around, making sure no one was close enough to overhear. Not here, he murmured. Someone might be listening. Ethan frowned. Why would anyone be listening? The man's gaze hardened. Because your mother wasn't just lost. He lowered his voice even further. She was taken. A chill crept up Ethan's spine. Taken by who? The janitor swallowed, eyes full of old fear. By someone in your family. Ava gasped softly, one hand rising to her mouth. Ethan felt the ground shift. My family? Are you out of your mind? No, sir, the man said firmly. I worked for the Blake household years back, the old estate in North Georgia, before your father passed. Ethan's breath left him in a rush. Who are you? Name's Samuel, he said, offering a trembling hand. I kept to myself after things went bad, but when I saw the news, he gestured toward the hallway TV, tuned to a muted local station. Saw you bringing that woman here. I knew it was her. Ethan seized his arm. Tell me now. Who did this to her? Samuel hesitated, eyes flicking toward the corners of the ceiling as if afraid of hidden cameras. I'll tell you only once, he whispered. Your mother discovered the truth about your father's will. She knew who the rightful heir was and who wasn't. Ethan's jaw tightened. Meaning what? Meaning someone stood to lose everything if she talked. Ava took a step forward. Who? Samuel. Samuel lowered his voice to a trembling whisper. Your uncle, Richard Blake. Silence. Something inside Ethan broke and reformed into something stronger, colder. My uncle? He repeated slowly. The man who helped run Bright Core? The man who helped raise me after my father died? Samuel nodded solemnly. He feared your mother would expose him. So he had her removed. Id knows. Ethan staggered back as though struck. Ava reached toward him. Ethan, but his world was spinning. The empty coffin, the years of searching, the inheritance battles he never questioned, the chain link, the bruises, the voice whispering someone close. It all clicked into place with horrifying clarity. How long have you known? He whispered. Since the day she vanished, Samuel replied. But your uncle paid people to keep quiet. Some were too scared to talk. Others took his money and never looked back. Ethan clenched his fist so tightly his nails cut into his palms. And why talk now? Samuel looked toward Ava, then toward Mama Ruth's door. Because she lived, he said softly. Because she found her way back. And because the truth doesn't stay buried forever, Ava whispered. Justice may not be fair, but it is patient. Ethan's voice, when it came, was barely human. I'll make him pay. Ava caught his arm. No, you'll find the truth. Then justice. In that order. He stared at her, her swollen, bruised face, her steady eyes, and something in him calmed, but only a fraction. Samuel leaned closer. Be careful, Mr. Blake. Your uncle is powerful. Connected. If he learns your mother survived. He hesitated. He won't hesitate to finish what he started. Ethan swallowed hard, the weight of the warning sinking into his bones. She isn't dying again, he said. Not this time. Not on his terms. Ava nodded, her voice gentle but unwavering. Then we stand together, and we start with what she tried to tell you before she lost consciousness. Ethan looked at her sharply. What? Ava repeated the word Mama Ruth had whispered earlier, the one that echoed like prophecy. Beware. Ethan turned toward the glass, toward the fragile figure lying in the dim hospital room. And he understood. The truth was no longer simply a mystery. It was a threat. And it was coming. The early hours of morning crept into the hospital like a thief, quiet, soft, but relentless. A pale pink light seeped through the windows, touching the sterile tile floors and the sleeping forms in the waiting room. The coffee had gone cold. The hum of machines echoed faintly, a background symphony to worry and weariness. Ethan sat in a vinyl chair outside his mother's room, his head in his hands. The words Samuel had whispered earlier still looped in his mind, like a scratched record. Your uncle. He had her removed. The betrayal sank in deeper with every breath. He had trusted Richard, grew up in the man's shadow, led him into boardrooms, family dinners, every part of his life. And all along, that man had been hiding the truth. Behind the glass, Mama Ruth stirred. Ethan looked up at once, his heart leaping. A nurse inside noticed the movement too. She leaned in, checked the monitors, then gently helped Mama Ruth adjust the oxygen line under her nose. "She's waking up," the nurse said softly, stepping toward the door. "You can come in, but one at a time, please." Ethan rose immediately. Ava stood up too, but paused. "Go," she said. "She needs to see you first." He hesitated for half a second, then gave a grateful nod. He stepped through the doorway into the dim, humming room. Mama Ruth's eyes opened slowly. The whites had a cloudy haze to them, but her gaze sharpened as they landed on Ethan's face. "Ethan," she whispered, her voice papery. "Mama." He moved to her side, dropping to one knee. "You're awake," she smiled faintly. "I had a dream that my boy had become a man." He tried to laugh, but the sound cracked under the weight of emotion. "You dreamed right, though I think I lost pieces of myself along the way." She reached up, touching his jaw with fragile fingers. "But you're here now. That's enough." A beat passed before Ethan whispered, "Mama, what happened to you?" Her fingers froze on his skin. "You don't have to tell me all of it," he added quickly. "But I need to know. I need to understand." Mama Ruth's gaze shifted to the window, where morning light spilled in like revelation. Then she slowly turned back. 15 years ago, she began. "I was coming home from the farmer's market. It was a Sunday. I remember. The air smelled of peaches. Ethan's throat tightened. "I had just gotten off the bus. Your father had passed not long before, and I'd spent months going over his legal papers. There were things in his will, things your uncle didn't want anyone to see." Ethan blinked. "Like what?" She took a breath. "Your father left Bright Core in your name. All of it. He wanted you to inherit it when you turned 25. Until then, it was to remain in trust. But Richard, your uncle, knew. He'd helped draft the early documents. He thought the board would never support you too young, too green. But I said no. I said I would make sure your father's wishes were honored." Her hand clenched weakly on the blanket. "I never got the chance. That Sunday, a car pulled up beside me. 2 men jumped out. They didn't ask questions. They dragged me into the back seat, blindfolded me. I screamed, but no one stopped." Ethan's face paled. "I was taken to a house big, empty, somewhere in the hills outside Savannah, I think. Underground. No windows. A mattress on the floor. A bolt on the outside of the door." Tears slid silently down her cheeks. "They kept me there for months. Brought food once a day. Sometimes not at all. I begged them. I told them you'd be looking for me." "And they said," Ethan asked, barely breathing, "that you'd been told I was dead, that a car crash had taken me, and that you'd already buried me." "It dizzy." Ethan pressed his hands to his mouth, rocking forward. "They lied to me. Lied to everyone." She nodded faintly. "And I started to believe I really had died. Only my body didn't know it yet." A moment passed before she continued. "One day, one of the men, an older one, got drunk. He let me go to the kitchen. I saw the sunrise through a cracked window. I thought maybe I could escape, but I was too weak." Her eyes drifted shut for a second, then reopened. "He slipped on the stairs one night, broke his neck. He didn't come back. No one did." Ethan's brows furrowed. "You escaped?" "I crawled out," she said. "I don't know how far I walked. I only know that after a while, no one called me by name anymore. I became just another beggar woman." Ethan leaned closer, gently brushing her hair from her forehead. "Why didn't you tell anyone? The police?" She looked at him with deep, broken eyes. Would they have believed me? A half-mad woman in rags claiming to be the mother of Ethan Blake? He had no answer. "I kept the chain," she added. "A piece from the bolt they used. I wrapped it in cloth, carried it in my pocket, because I needed to remember it was real. That I was real." Ethan swallowed hard. "You don't need that anymore. I'm here, and I believe you." She smiled, then winced from the effort. "I thought you'd forget me," she said softly. "That the world would turn you into someone I wouldn't recognize." I almost became that, he admitted. But someone stopped me. A girl named Ava, her eyes lit with recognition. The maid, yes, she, has a light in her, Mama Ruth whispered. Don't lose it, Ethan nodded. They sat quietly for a few moments. Then she looked at him again. There's more, she said. Your uncle. He was always careful, but he was also arrogant. He thought no one would trace anything back to him. If we do, then we will, Ethan said. We'll expose him. Her hand found his. Do it with honor. Not hate. Ethan blinked away tears. I will. A knock at the door broke the stillness. Ava stepped in slowly, eyes darting between them. She's awake? She asked gently. Mama Ruth smiled weakly. My angel. Ethan turned to Ava. She told me everything. Ava moved closer, her face softening. Then the real work begins. It not. Ethan looked at both of them, his mother, his protector, and something inside him steadied. Yes, he said, and we'll do it together. The next morning came too quickly. Ethan Blake stood before the polished mirror in his penthouse bathroom. His reflection far too familiar and entirely unrecognizable. The bruises beneath his eyes weren't from fists, but from revelation. His mother, alive. His uncle, a traitor. And himself blinded by wealth, by pride, by everything he thought made him a man. He adjusted his cufflinks. The silver ones his mother had given him for his 30th birthday. The ones he hadn't worn since the day she was declared dead. Today, he wore them with intention. In the living room, Ava sat cross-legged on the edge of a leather couch, her borrowed clothes slightly wrinkled from sleeping upright. She'd refused the guest room, refused rest. Really, she'd spent the night combing through what little public information there was on Richard Blake, and even less on the family's private financial holdings. When Ethan walked out, she looked up. You look like you're headed into battle, she said, sipping black coffee from a Brightcore mug. I am. She stood. So what's the plan? I'm going to the board, he said. I'm going to look Richard in the eye and pretend I don't know a thing. Her brow furrowed. Why pretend? Because if he knows we're onto him, he'll cover his tracks, erase evidence, move money, or worse, he'll try to silence her again. Ava crossed her arms. Then you better be a damn good actor. Ethan gave her a faint smile. I've been pretending since I was 12. I'll manage. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. And if he suspects you already know, then I'll remind him why I run the company now. She nodded once. Be careful. Ethan. His voice turned quiet. I will. The Brightcore headquarters sat like a glass cathedral in downtown Atlanta, its reflective windows glittering under the southern sun. Inside, the boardroom was already full. 12 men and women in tailored suits sat around the mahogany table, murmuring over morning espresso and quarterly reports. At the far end sat Richard Blake, gray hair, crisp navy suit, eyes like polished steel. The man had aged well but not kindly. His handshake still crushed fingers, his voice still carried the weight of command. And his presence still stank of something Ethan could never name as a child but now recognized clearly. Calculated control. Ethan entered with the easy smile of a man with nothing to hide. Morning, he said, tossing his leather folder onto the table. Richard rose with a wide, performative grin. Ethan, we weren't expecting you today. Thought you were on leave. I was, Ethan said, taking his seat. But I decided to check in. We're calling for us. Everything all right? Richard asked, eyes gleaming just a little too much. Peachy, Ethan replied. Just needed to be reminded of what a well-oiled machine looks like. Polite chuckles circled the table. The meeting began, routine at first. Financials, market growth, technology partnerships. Ethan watched Richard the entire time, noting every tick, every pause, every word chosen a little too carefully. Then, Ethan spoke. Casually. I want to open up a review, he said, spinning a pen between his fingers. Richard arched a brow. A review? Yes, Ethan said, of the board's records, specifically from 15 years ago. The room stilled. That's a long time ago, Richard said slowly. Exactly why it needs a fresh look. So much of our infrastructure was built, then contracts, property acquisitions, legal trusts. Richard's smile faltered, just for a second. That was when your father passed. Are you feeling nostalgic? Something like that, Ethan said. One of the board members leaned forward. Any particular reason for the review, Ethan? He smiled. Just good governance. It's time we make sure everything back then was as clean as we thought. Richard spoke again, this time with a sharper edge. We already went through audits during the transition. I know, Ethan said coolly. But this time, I'll be personally leading the review. No external firm. I want eyes on every file, especially those involving family-held assets. Now the smiles were gone. The room hummed with quiet tension. Richard leaned back in his chair, folding his hands. I trust you know what you're doing. I always do, Ethan replied, meeting his uncle's eyes. For a long moment, neither blinked. Back at the hospital, Ava sat beside Mama Ruth's bed. She was feeding her spoonfuls of warm broth, careful not to spill a drop. The old woman was stronger this morning, her voice still frail but clearer. You stayed all night, Mama Ruth whispered. I don't leave people behind, Ava replied softly. You remind me of someone. Who? My sister. She had that same stubborn grace. Left home when she was young. Always helped strangers before herself. Ava smiled faintly. I guess it runs in the sisterhood. Mama Ruth studied her face. He's going into danger. Ava nodded. He knows. Oh, does he know what Richard is capable of? Ava looked down. He's beginning to. Mama Ruth gripped her hand weakly. Don't let him do this alone. Promise me. I won't, Ava said, tightening her hold. I'll be his shadow if I have to. Mama Ruth sighed, her voice barely audible. There are things I haven't told him yet, things I remembered in pieces. But he has to be ready. Then I'll make sure he is. That night, Ethan returned to the hospital, face drawn, eyes hard. He found Ava in the hallway. Well? She asked. I saw it in his eyes, Ethan said. He knows I'm coming for him. Ava's heart skipped. And now I'm certain, he whispered. Richard was behind it. All of it. She stepped closer. What's next? We crack open the books, Ethan said. We find the paper trail. And when we do, you bring it to the police? He paused. No, not yet. Why not? Because I want him to know what it feels like to lose everything first. This present that is not guys. His voice held a fire she hadn't heard before, controlled, cold, but burning all the same. Ava didn't argue. She simply stood beside him, facing the storm together. 2 days later, the sun baked the slate roof of the old estate in North Georgia, once the pride of the Blake family's legacy. The iron gates were rusting at the hinges, but the hedges still bore the shape of lions, silent, majestic, and watching. Inside, the air was stale with age and the cold scent of wealth. It was here, among dust-covered oil portraits and antique oak panels, that Ethan believed the truth would reveal itself. He and Ava stepped out of the SUV, the gravel crunching beneath their shoes. A locksmith trailed behind them, already breaking the seal on the old side entrance. I haven't been here since I was 17, Ethan said quietly, staring up at the house. Ava glanced at the grand windows and the heavy stone archway above them. Looks like the kind of place where secrets get buried. He nodded. Or locked behind doors no one dares open. Inside, Ethan led the way through echoing halls. Dust clung to every surface like secrets too long undisturbed. He walked with purpose now, the memory of his mother's story, fueling each step. Somewhere inside this house, he believed, was the paper trail documents from 15 years ago that could connect Richard Blake to her disappearance. They just had to find it. They began in the study. It was a room from another century, mahogany bookshelves, high-backed chairs, and a liquor cabinet that hadn't been touched in years. At the far end stood a locked filing cabinet, rust creeping up the hinges. Ethan handed the locksmith the keyring retrieved from the office archives. Start with this one. Ava wandered to the desk, running her fingers across a thin layer of dust. She opened a drawer and found stacks of old correspondence, handwritten letters, memos with the Blake logo. and a small leather journal labeled Personal R.B. She raised an eyebrow. You might want to see this. Ethan turned from the cabinet, eyes narrowing as he approached. He flipped the journal open. The handwriting was Richard's neat, angular, meticulous. He skimmed a few pages. Meeting with trustee moved to Tuesday. Ethan still too young to understand the weight of this legacy. 8. Ruth is asking questions. Too many. She's combing through the estate files again. Contact Maid. Discretion will be maintained. Must ensure silence. Ethan's jaw tightened. He wrote it all down, like a man who didn't think anyone would dare read it. Ava looked over his shoulder. He wasn't hiding it. He was memorializing it. That's even worse. At that moment, the locksmith popped the final drawer on the filing cabinet. Got it. Ethan and Ava rushed over. Inside were dozens of folders, some labeled in bold black marker: inheritance, trust transfer, asset shift, and custody of estate. Ethan pulled out the file marked inheritance. Inside was a copy of his father's will, one Ethan had never seen before. He opened it, and his chest tightened. This is it, he whispered. This version. It's not the one the lawyers read to me after Dad died. What's different? Ava asked. He pointed to a line buried deep on the second page. It names me sole heir and gives Ruth temporary oversight until I turn 25. The version I saw put the estate in Richard's hands, until further notice. Ava exhaled. So he doctored the will. Suppressed this one. He had it rewritten. And likely paid off the legal team to validate it. Can you prove it? Ethan reached deeper into the drawer, pulling out a notarized letter, one with the original law firm's seal, and a signature that didn't match any he'd seen on file. I can now. I devered an idea with Cruz. Ava flipped through another folder, then paused, her brow furrowed. What? Ethan asked. She held up a bank ledger. These transfers. Look at the dates. He stepped beside her. Large sums of money, tens of thousands, moved to shell corporations and offshore accounts, all shortly after his mother's disappearance. And here, she pointed again. Payments labeled consultation fees. Ethan's eyes narrowed. That's a cover. For what? He looked at her grimly. For whoever helped take her, with prosit and them bitterest. She stared at the names on the document, initials only. D, H, M, L, S, G. We need to find out who these people are. Ethan nodded. If we can trace these accounts, we'll know everyone involved. And if we can tie the timing to when Mama Ruth vanished, we can take it to the police. Ava finished. No. Ethan's voice was like steel. She blinked. No? We take it to the press, to the world. Ethan, they buried her alive, he said. They left her to rot. I won't let them disappear into silence. I want everyone to know what kind of man Richard Blake really is. Ava studied him. That kind of exposure comes with danger. I'm not afraid anymore. She nodded. Then we do it together. Back in Atlanta, Richard Blake sipped his bourbon in the penthouse suite of a downtown hotel. He stared out the window at the city he helped build, unaware of what had just been found. A phone rang. He answered. Yes? A thin voice crackled through the line. There was activity at the North Georgia estate. Ethan's team opened the study. Richard didn't respond right away. Then, coldly, shut it down. Whatever's left. And find out who's helping him. He ended the call. For a moment, his reflection stared back at him in the glass, older, but still powerful. He smirked. Let the boy dig, he muttered. Let's see if he knows what to do with what he finds. It is friend. That night, Ethan and Ava sat in his office. Documents spread across the desk. Computers buzzing. Ava leaned back. So what now? Ethan stared at the original will, then at the ledger, then finally, at his phone. We call a journalist, he said. Someone who doesn't owe the Blakes anything. And after that? He glanced at the window, city lights blinking like stars below. After that, he said, we set the world on fire. With the Snarry, Ethan sat alone in his office as midnight swallowed the city skyline. The lights from the buildings below glittered like a constellation of quiet witnesses, each window a silent eye on a world that rarely blinked. His phone lay on the desk, a number already dialed, his finger hovering above the call button. He wasn't calling a lawyer. He wasn't calling a board member. He was calling her, the one person in Atlanta who still remembered how to chase fire with a notebook and a tape recorder. Lena Kavanaugh, he murmured under his breath. Pulitzer nominated, disgraced, then vindicated. Known for exposing corruption within the mayor's office a decade ago, and for paying dearly for it. She hadn't worked for a major outlet since. Instead, she wrote long-form investigations for a fiercely independent online journal called The Lantern. Read mostly by skeptics, old-school thinkers, and Americans who still believed in deep digging over headline chasing. He pressed call 9. The phone rang once. Twice. Then a voice answered, smoky and sharp-edged. This better be life or death. It might be, Ethan said. It's Ethan Blake. A pause. Well, that's a name I didn't expect on my phone tonight. Another pause. You got 30 seconds to make me not hang up. My mother is alive. Dead silence. Then, cautiously, you buried her 15 years ago. I buried a closed casket. He said. We were lied to. She was taken. By someone in my family. I have the proof. We're quote. Lena didn't respond at first. Then, slowly. And you want to talk to me because you don't owe my family anything, and you won't back off when the pressure comes. More silence. Then a short breath. Meet me tomorrow. She said. 8 a.m. Southbound coffee. Back patio. Don't bring a lawyer. Don't bring a bodyguard. If I see you with a briefcase or a goon, I walk. He nodded as if she could see him. I'll be there. Icon. Southbound coffee was tucked away on the edge of Grant Park, surrounded by overgrown trees and ivy-draped brick. It didn't look like the kind of place where billionaires held secret meetings, which made it perfect. Ethan arrived 5 minutes early. Lena was already seated on the back patio, sipping black coffee and wearing dark sunglasses. Her long gray coat fluttered in the wind like a flag that had seen too many battles. She didn't stand when he approached. She only tilted her head slightly. You look thinner in person, and you sound taller in print. She cracked a smile. Sit. He did, and for the next 10 minutes, he laid out everything. The false will, the missing years, his mother's reappearance, Richard's hidden transactions, Ava's role in uncovering it all. He slid across copies of the journal entries and ledgers, the notarized will, and the shell company names. Lena barely blinked. When he finished, she leaned back and folded her arms. Well, she said finally. Either you're telling the truth, or you've crafted the greatest revenge fantasy since Greek tragedy. I have more, Ethan said. Audio from my mother. A recorded statement. We're verifying financials as we speak. Why now? She asked. Why bring this to me, when you could quietly take it to court? Let the law do its thing. Because I don't trust the law to do its thing, he said. Not when Richards bought half the judges and slept with the other half's fundraisers. Lena nodded slowly. That's fair. He hesitated, then added, and because if something happens to me or Ava or my mother, I want the truth to already be out there. I want you to publish everything. She studied him over the rim of her cup. You're not afraid anymore. No, he said. I'm furious. A pause. Then you've come to the right woman. She gathered the documents into her satchel. I'll start cross-referencing within the hour, but I need access. Emails, board memos, anything that can't be waved away with a PR stunt. You'll have it, Ethan said. I'll get you the rest today. She stood, pushing her chair in. And Ethan, don't think this story ends with a headline. Once it's out there, you won't be able to put it back in the box. I don't want it in a box, he said. I want it in flames. Later that afternoon, Ava sat beside Mama Ruth in the hospital room, braiding her hair gently. The old woman's strength had returned in increments. Her appetite was better, her voice stronger, and her memory sharper. I heard him on the phone, Mama Ruth said suddenly, her voice breaking the silence. Ava paused. Richard? She nodded. The day before they took me, he was angry, talking to someone named Gaines or maybe it was Granger. Ava's brow furrowed. Do you remember what he said? He said, if she opens her mouth, we lose the whole damn estate. She looked up at Ava. That's when I knew I had to act. I thought I had time. I didn't. Ava squeezed her hand. You made it back. That's all that matters now. The old woman's eyes filled with tears. You believed me when no one else did. You're the reason he believes now too, Ava said. That night, back in Ethan's home office, the first draft of Lena's exposé appeared in his inbox. He opened it with trembling hands. The Billionaire's Mother, a legacy of lies buried alive. The subheadline was worse: how power, greed, and silence nearly erased a woman from history until her son finally listened. He read the first few paragraphs. Lena's voice was razor-sharp, unflinching. She named Richard directly, laid out the evidence, told Ava's part, described Ruth's captivity with chilling precision. And it was only part one. Ava stepped in quietly behind him, reading over his shoulder. She doesn't pull punches, Ava said. She throws them, Ethan murmured. He sat back, closing the laptop. We release it in 48 hours. That gives us time to finalize the rest of the files. And after that, he looked at her, his eyes now calm, focused. After that, Richard Blake answers to the world. Richard Blake wasn't a man easily shaken. In his 62 years, he had weathered stock market crashes, lawsuits, boardroom mutinies, and even the death of his own brother, with little more than a furrowed brow and another ice cube in his scotch. But tonight, standing in his private penthouse study with the city sprawled beneath him, something felt different. He had been receiving calls all evening. Not the kind that screamed panic, but the kind that whistled through the cracks. His longtime assistant had canceled tomorrow's lunch. The board chair texted a cryptic, "We should talk." And, worst of all, he'd heard that Lena Kavanaugh had been seen in Grant Park again. Richard muttered a curse. He pulled open the drawer of his desk and took out the burner phone he kept for emergencies. Only a few trusted contacts knew the number. He dialed a code, waited, and spoke when the voice on the other end answered. "I told you to monitor Ethan, not sit on your hands. We've been watching him," the voice replied. "But he's being careful. No digital leaks, no paper trails, and now he's using Kavanaugh? She's a wild card." Richard's voice turned icy. "She's a damn grenade. If she publishes anything, even suggests my involvement, she won't get that far. We have people ready. Not enough. Find someone inside, someone close, a staffer, a driver, I don't care. If Ethan or that maid opens their mouths before I control the narrative, everything we've built comes crashing down." There was a pause. Then, understood. Richard ended the call. He stared out the floor-to-ceiling window. His reflection looked back, distorted slightly by the glass. He raised his glass to it. "To survival," he muttered, then drank. The next morning, Ava made her way to the mailroom of Ethan's building. Though she'd insisted she was fine staying in the guest house behind the estate, she'd come in early to retrieve a few confidential envelopes. Lena requested handwritten letters, some medical reports, and the original time-stamped photo of Ruth's bracelet before it was cleaned. She hadn't expected the elevator to stop on floor 17. When the doors opened, a tall woman in a maintenance uniform stepped in, too well-groomed to be just another cleaner. Her badge said, "Temp Staffing Solutions." After that, Ava offered a polite nod. "Good morning." The woman returned it, cool and polite. The elevator resumed, but Ava noticed the woman's gaze flick toward the envelope in her hands, specifically the name L. Kavanaugh, printed in block letters. Just as she realized it, the elevator jerked. The woman pressed the emergency stop. Ava froze. "What are you doing?" The woman smiled faintly. "Just a quick word." She stepped closer, voice low. "Miss Kavanaugh is playing with matches. You might want to think twice about delivering gasoline." Ava's grip on the envelope tightened. "Who are you?" she asked. The woman tilted her head. "Just someone who knows how stories end, especially ones told too loud." The elevator buzzed, and the emergency light flashed. Ava stood tall, not flinching. "If this is supposed to scare me, you'll have to do better." The woman leaned in closer. "Careful, Miss Jones. There's always a price to being the hero." The elevator resumed. The woman stepped out on the next floor without another word. Ava exhaled only once the doors closed again. She immediately called Ethan. Ethan listened in silence as Ava relayed the encounter. He stood in the hallway outside Mama Ruth's room, one hand gripping the phone, the other clenched in a fist. "They've started," he said quietly, "trying to intimidate us." "Won't work," Ava replied. "But it means we're close." He nodded. "Then it's time to accelerate. We have done." That afternoon, Lena published part 1. It hit the Lantern at 2 p.m. sharp. By 2:07, the site was crashing. By 2:15, number Ruth Blake was alive was trending on Twitter. And by 2:30, Richard's personal PR firm was sending out a hasty press release. "Mr. Richard Blake has no knowledge of the allegations presented and is deeply troubled by the manipulation of facts. The Blake family will respond formally through legal channels." Ethan read it and smiled coldly. "They're scrambling," he told Ava, who sat across from him, laptop open, dozens of open tabs flashing with news alerts. "They're also watching us," she said. That woman in the elevator wasn't bluffing. She knew what she was doing. "Then let's give them something else to watch." Ethan clicked open a folder on his desktop labeled Phase 2. Inside were video files. One was a recorded interview with Ruth, given just 2 days earlier, where she softly recalled being threatened by Richard's assistant before she vanished. Another showed Ethan reading the original will aloud, time-stamped, notarized. But the third video was different. It showed Ava, bruised, calm, her voice firm as she described the night Ethan struck her, and how even then, she stayed because she believed in the truth. "This will go public next," Ethan said. "They won't expect us to show our own scars." Ava didn't look away. "Good. Let's bleed first. Let them follow." That evening, Richard sat alone again, this time in a private security firm's underground office. On the screen before him were news anchors, panel debates, and tweets dissecting the story. One phrase kept appearing: "Justice doesn't care who wears the suit." He reached for the remote, clicked the TV off, and turned to his assistant. "Find out where she's being kept," he said. "Ruth?" "Yes, and then find a way to move her." Quietly. "You want her gone?" "I want her unreachable." The assistant hesitated. "That's going to be difficult." Richard's gaze turned lethal. "So is breathing with broken ribs. Make it happen." Meanwhile, at the hospital, Ethan and Ava arrived for their nightly visit to Ruth, only to find her room empty. No nurses. No patient. Just an unplugged monitor and a cold bed. Ethan turned to the hallway, voice raw. "Where is she?" Adia Mentor. Ava rushed to the nurse's station. "Where's Ruth Blake? She was in 417. The nurse blinked. "She was discharged." "What? By who?" "Her son." Ethan's breath caught. "I am her son." The nurse paled. Ava's voice broke. "They got to her." Ethan's jaw clenched as he turned to Ava. "We're out of time." The sterile smell of the hospital corridor turned suffocating as Ethan stood frozen, his fists clenched, knuckles white against his sides. The words echoed like a gunshot in his mind. She was discharged by her son. Ava touched his arm gently. "Ethan, we need to move. Now." He blinked, eyes wild. "Check the surveillance. Find the paperwork. There has to be footage. A signature." They rushed to the administrative wing, pushing past nurses and bewildered staff. At the security office, Ethan slammed his hand on the desk. "I want to see the video from room 417. Everything from the last 6 hours. We could." The guard hesitated, then scanned Ethan's face recognition flaring. "Yes, sir. Right away." The footage loaded on the monitor. At first, everything was quiet. Mama Ruth lay in her bed, eyes closed, monitors beeping steadily. Then, at 1:43 p.m., a man in scrubs entered. He walked with purpose, not rushed, not hesitant. He moved straight to the IV line and unplugged it. Ethan leaned closer. Zoom in on his badge. The screen sharpened. It read, "Dr. Lewis Carter, attending." Ava shook her head. "There's no Dr. Carter assigned to her." They kept watching. The man gently lifted Ruth into a wheelchair, covered her with a blanket, and rolled her out. No commotion, no resistance, no panic, as if she trusted him. "Stop right there," Ethan ordered. "Reverse. Zoom on the wheelchair." Ava squinted. "It's got a sticker. Private Transport Company." "Get me the name," Ethan growled. The guard scribbled it down. Safe Ride Health Logistics, Ava read aloud. Never heard of it. Ethan was already on his phone. Call Lena, he said. Tell her everything. I'll find the transport company. We have to track the route, whatever GPS they used, whoever ordered that van. If they moved her off the books, she could be anywhere, Ava whispered. Ethan nodded grimly. But they made a mistake. They moved her in daylight. Across town, Lena Kavanaugh stared at the transcript Ava had just emailed her. Her jaw clenched with each line of dialogue. She was discharged by her son. He wasn't here. No digital record of the transport request. She stood and began packing her bag. A recorder, a second phone, her press badge, pepper spray, and a flask of bad bourbon, her war kit. She called Ethan. Did she fight back? She asked. No. Ethan replied, his voice low. She probably thought he was someone she knew. Someone we trusted. Then they're moving fast now, Lena said. Your uncle's getting reckless. I need your help. If we go to the police now, Richard will bury this under red tape. So we don't go to the police, Lena replied. We go louder. That night, Ava sat on the floor of Ethan's office, surrounded by printouts, transport logs, Richard's financial records, old employee photos. She was looking for a face, a name, a crack in the armor. Then she found it. Ethan, she called. He was at the desk, phone to his ear, barking orders at a private investigator. He turned. She held up a printed photo from 5 years ago, a gala in Savannah. Richard, surrounded by donors, and one man beside him, just out of frame, a man in a medical coat. Dr. Louis Carter, she said. Ethan stepped forward. That's the guy from the footage? Not exactly. Same name, different man. Look. She held up the hospital video beside the gala photo. The ID was faked, Ethan realized. They used a real name but planted someone else in the role. Ava clicked into an old article. Carter died in a car accident in 2019. That man isn't him. He's just wearing the badge. So who is he? She tapped another file, security firm profiles. Ethan, she said slowly. He works for Black Haven Security. It's a private company Richard's used for years. Most of their records are sealed. But their founder, Simon Voss, used to be a Marine intelligence officer. He owes Richard big. Ethan stared at the name. Then, that's who took her. At 2 a.m., Ethan and Ava drove through a winding rural road, guided by GPS pings left behind by the Safe Ride van. Their investigator had pulled the route from a highway camera near the hospital. It had left the city, headed north into the foothills. There's only a few locations that far out, Ava said, staring at the glowing map. Old family cabins, remote warehouses. Ethan nodded. He's stashing her where no one can hear her scream. But she's not the same woman anymore, Ava said, voice steady. She's survived 15 years in silence. She'll survive this. He looked over at her. Only if we get there in time. Inside a cold concrete building nestled in a forest clearing, Mama Ruth sat alone on a thin mattress. She was awake. She hadn't asked where she was. She hadn't panicked, because she knew they had taken her before. But this time, she wasn't the same woman. She ran her hand over her wrist, feeling the faint ridges of the old scar from the first time they locked her away. This time, there were no shackles, no chains, just men outside the door with guns and orders. She looked up at the surveillance camera in the corner and smiled faintly. They think I'm weak. Let them keep thinking it. She reached under the mattress where she had hidden a metal fork they'd forgotten to remove from her food tray, not to escape, but to remind herself that she was still sharp, still alive, still dangerous. Back in Atlanta, Lena hit publish on part 2 of her story. Part 2. The second disappearance of Ruth Blake. The subtitle read, First they buried her truth. Now they've buried her again. Phones buzzed, screens lit up, and in the penthouse office of Richard Blake, a glass shattered against the wall. Because the world was watching, and the clock was ticking, the road narrowed into a one-lane dirt path, hemmed by tall pines that clawed at the moonlight. Ethan gripped the steering wheel, eyes locked on the GPS dot blinking on the screen. Ava sat beside him, flashlight in hand, scanning the dark forest ahead like a co-pilot in hostile territory. We're close, she whispered. They hadn't spoken much during the last stretch of the drive. The weight of Ruth's abduction hung over them like a thundercloud that refused to break. Ethan's jaw was tight. Ava had removed her earrings and tied her hair back. Neither said it, but both were prepared for the worst. As the vehicle crept around a final bend, the trees opened to reveal an old facility, concrete, barbed wire fencing, and a floodlight humming above a rusted security gate. It didn't scream corporate or government, it screamed private, remote, untouchable. There, Ava said. That has to be it. Ethan killed the engine. They got out. The silence of the woods pressing against their ears like cotton. No dogs, no guards in sight. Just the whir of the floodlight and the hum of a generator somewhere inside. They approached the fence, ducking low. I count 3 cameras, Ava murmured. 1 on the west corner, 2 by the entrance, but no patrols, no vehicles. That's not right, Ethan said. They wouldn't leave her unguarded, unless they didn't expect anyone to find her. He nodded. Let's make sure they regret that. From a hidden compartment in the SUV's trunk, Ethan retrieved a compact drone. As it lifted into the air, he controlled it with steady hands, guiding it over the fence and through a broken second-story window. Inside, the monitor showed empty halls, flickering lights, peeling paint, and the faint shadow of motion in one room on the bottom floor. There, Ava said, pointing. Room C5. Ethan lowered the drone and pulled out a handheld radio. Lena, you copy? He asked. Static. Then, loud and clear. I've got a police contact standing by, but you'll need something solid before they come in. No warrant, no support. We'll get it, Ethan said. And Ethan, Lena added, be careful. This smells like a trap. He looked at Ava. She gave a small nod. Then let's walk in with our eyes open. Inside the building, Mama Ruth sat in the same room, bare, silent, except for the hum of a small heater and the dim light overhead. Her fork was still hidden under the mattress. She'd tried the door twice, locked, but she knew someone was coming. She felt it. That old instinct, the one she honed in silence for a decade and a half, was telling her to stay calm, to be ready. Her eyes flicked to the air vent above. Dust shifted. She smiled faintly. He's here. Ethan and Ava scaled the fence, landing with a crunch of gravel. Moving in practiced silence, they slipped past the floodlight's cone, pressing against the side of the building. A window had been pried open recently, likely used by the imposter to bring Ruth in. They climbed through it one by one. Inside, the air smelled of mildew and oil. Ethan's voice dropped to a whisper. Camera loop is holding. We've got 15 minutes. Maybe less. They moved down the hallway, boots silent on the cracked linoleum. Ava held the flashlight low. C1, C2, C3. A sudden creak stopped them cold. They pressed against the wall, holding their breath. Footsteps, slow, measured, coming from the stairwell. Ava mouthed, "Guard?" Ethan signaled, "Let him pass." The footsteps faded. They turned the next corner. Room C5. Ethan placed his hand gently on the knob. "Ruth," he whispered. Just loud enough. Inside, Mama Ruth sat up, eyes widening. "Ethan?" she croaked. He opened the door fast. Ava rushed in, wrapping a coat around her. "We're getting you out of here," she said softly. "Can you walk?" Ruth nodded. "I've walked through hell, baby. This is just a hallway." They helped her up, but just as they turned, the hallway lights flickered, then went out. The backup floodlights outside hummed louder. Then, voices. Male. Fast. Angry. "They're in the East Wing." Ava's eyes met Ethan's. They knew. He nodded. "We're not running. We're recording." He pulled out a small body cam, clipped it to his shirt, and pressed record. "Let's go." They moved fast now, guiding Ruth down the corridor toward the same broken window. Ava scanned the path ahead. No movement. No flashlights yet. Until, "Stop!" a voice barked behind them. They turned. 2 men in tactical black, one with a stun baton, the other reaching for a weapon. Ethan stepped forward. "Touch her, and the whole world sees this in 5 minutes." He raised the cam. "We're live. Right now, you harm one hair on her head, and your faces go viral." The guards hesitated. Then, "Stand down," one muttered. "Let him go." The other looked toward the hallway, clearly listening to an earpiece. A long pause. Then both men turned and walked away, vanished into the shadows. Ethan didn't wait. He lifted Ruth into his arms and sprinted with Ava toward the broken window. Moments later, they were outside, scaling the fence, breath visible in the cold night air. Behind them, the compound stood silent again, but now it had been seen, documented, and soon it would burn. Back in the SUV, Ruth sipped from a thermos Ava had packed. She was pale, but smiling. "You came for me." Ethan reached for her hand. "This time, no one's burying you again." Ava turned to him. "Lena's waiting. She's got media outlets on hold. All we need is your word." Ethan looked into the rearview mirror at his mother, at her scars, her strength, her eyes clearer than he'd ever seen them. "Run it all," he said. "No more secrets." Ava nodded, and in the back seat, Ruth Blake whispered, "Let them come. I'm ready." The sun hadn't risen yet when Lena Kavanaugh stepped onto the rooftop of her downtown office building. She stood with a cup of bitter coffee in hand, her windbreaker zipped up against the December chill, watching the slow glow of morning push against the Atlanta skyline. The files were ready. The article was written. The footage from the rescue had been uploaded to a secure drive. And now came the moment she had trained for her entire career. Truth, with teeth. She picked up her phone and dialed her editor. "Drop it," she said. "All of it. I want it front page, full feature. Don't hold back for legal." "You're sure?" Lena looked out at the horizon. Richard Blake tried to erase a woman. Twice. He failed. Let the world know. By 8 a.m., the headlines screamed. Breaking. Ruth Blake rescued from illegal detainment, Blake family empire in freefall. Video evidence links Richard Blake to decades of fraud, abuse, and cover-ups. Heroic Maid helps uncover one of the biggest scandals in Georgia history. The footage, grainy but clear, showed Ava and Ethan leading Ruth through a decaying hallway, past armed guards who backed away under the threat of exposure. The audio was unmistakable. Ethan's voice calm, Ruth's whisper, "Let them come. I'm ready." It is live. In less than an hour, the video had 2.3 million views. In 2, it had gone global. At Blake Industries headquarters, the panic was immediate. PR teams flooded the phones, spinning stories faster than Richard could approve them. But nothing stuck. No explanation could undo what the world had seen. At 9:14 a.m., the board of directors issued a rare public statement. "We are deeply disturbed by the emerging revelations. Effective immediately, Richard Blake has been placed on administrative leave pending investigation." By 10:30, stock prices began to fall, and by noon, the FBI requested an interview. Richard didn't respond. He didn't show up at his office. He didn't issue a denial, because Richard Blake was already gone. At Ethan's estate, the atmosphere was hushed, but electric. Reporters had begun gathering at the gates, held back by security. Inside, Ruth sat in the sunroom with a blanket over her knees, watching the birds flit around the feeders Ava had hung in the yard. "I used to sit like this before they took me," she said quietly, pretending the quiet meant safety. Ava knelt beside her. "You're not pretending anymore," Ruth smiled. "No, baby. Now I remember what safety feels like." Ethan stepped in from the hallway, holding a tablet. "They're offering interviews," he said. "CNN, NPR, even the New York Times. They all want your story." Ruth looked at him, her eyes soft. "Let's not give them just a story. Let's give them a warning." He sat beside her. "What do you mean?" "That evil doesn't always look like a monster," she said. "Sometimes it wears a suit. Sometimes it calls itself family. But when you tell the truth long enough, someone hears you." Ava reached for Ruth's hand. "We heard you." Meanwhile, in a dark motel room on the outskirts of Savannah, Richard Blake paced. His once perfect hair was now unkempt, his tailored suit replaced with a wrinkled shirt and jeans. The television on the wall played his downfall on loop. He watched as Lena's voice narrated over the rescue footage. A woman disappeared for 15 years, not because she was weak, but because she was powerful enough to know the truth. Her silence was enforced, her captivity orchestrated, but her son, once blind, now sees. And the maid they underestimated? She pulled the thread that unraveled a dynasty. Richard hurled the remote at the screen. "You stupid boy," he growled. "You don't know what you've done." He opened a duffel bag, cash, burner phones, a fake passport. Then, a knock. He froze. Another knock. He reached for the pistol beneath his jacket. "Who is it?" he barked. A voice replied cold, clipped. "FBI." Richard didn't move. "Mr. Blake, we have a warrant. Step away from the door." Oh, a second passed. Then two. The gun lowered. He walked to the door slowly and opened it. Two agents stood there, stone-faced. "Richard Blake," one said. "You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, unlawful detainment, forgery, and obstruction of justice." He said nothing. They cuffed him, let him out. The world watched. That evening, Ethan and Ava sat by the fireplace in the main house. Ruth had gone to bed early, her body still recovering, but her spirit bright. Ethan stared into the flames. "I used to think power was about control," he said. "About keeping everything locked down so no one could hurt you." Ava leaned her head on his shoulder. "And now? Now I know real power is in telling the truth, no matter the cost." She smiled. "Sounds like someone I used to work for." He chuckled softly. "You still do." She tilted her head. "Do I?" He turned to her. "Not as a maid. Not anymore. I want you beside me. As a partner. In everything." Ava studied his face. There was no arrogance now. No superiority. Just sincerity. "Okay," she said. "But only if we put that horrid garden sculpture in the garage. It scares the kids." He laughed. "Deal." The next morning, as the world continued to react to the story, a quiet letter appeared in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, an op-ed penned by Ruth Blake. In it, she wrote, "They buried me in silence. But silence is not death. I have returned not to seek revenge, but to remind those who feel invisible. You are not alone. Justice may be slow, but it walks with purpose, and the next time they try to hide someone like me, may they remember how loudly the truth can scream." The Blake estate had never been so quiet. After days of headlines, helicopters, and press conferences, it was as if the house itself had exhaled. But the silence now was no longer one of secrets, it was one of healing. The cameras were gone. The protesters had left the gates. And inside, Ruth Blake sat once more in the grand library, the very room she had designed decades earlier but hadn't seen in over 15 years. Her fingers grazed the spine of a leather-bound volume of poetry. She opened to a folded page. "Langston Hughes," she whispered. "Still here?" Ava entered gently, a tray in her hands with ginger tea and slices of toast. "I figured you might need a break from the chaos," she said. Ruth smiled. "Child, after what I've been through, chaos feels like jazz music now, messy, but familiar." Ava set the tray down. "You've got a call coming in an hour. PBS wants to do a feature interview, and NPR's StoryCorps wants to record a segment." Ruth shook her head. "I'll do one, but not both. I'm not some headline. I'm someone's mother, a woman who was forgotten. I want my voice to matter, but not because they pity me." Ava sat beside her. "Then you lead the story. You own it." Ruth took her hand. "You taught me how to own it, Ava. You never stopped believing I was worth saving." They sat together, the warmth between them deeper than blood. Meanwhile, Ethan stood in the estate's conference room, facing the newly appointed board members of Blake Industries. Gone were the polished yes-men. In their place were hard-faced, diverse professionals, people who'd earned their seats, not inherited them. "We've reviewed the damage," one of them said. "The company can survive, but only if we cooperate with all investigations, settle claims, and restructure leadership, starting with you, Ethan." He nodded. "I agree. You're voluntarily stepping down as CEO?" another asked, surprised. "Yes," Ethan said firmly. "I want transparency, not control." Murmurs moved around the table. "I'll stay on as chair of the foundation," he added. "I want to turn the Blake legacy into something more than luxury and land grabs. Let's rebuild the public trust. Let's rebuild the family name." A pause. Then one board member, a woman in her 60s with steel-gray hair, leaned forward. "You've changed," she said. "Most men in your position double down. You burned it all down instead. Ethan looked toward the window. I didn't burn it, he said quietly. The truth did. Later that day, Ava visited the small home on the south side of Atlanta where she had grown up. It was modest, 2 bedrooms, peeling paint, a porch swing that squeaked when the wind moved. Her father, Henry, stood on the porch with a newspaper in hand. He looked up when she arrived, eyes glassy, but proud. I read every word, he said. Ava stepped up, heart in her throat. Dad, I'm sorry, he interrupted. I didn't believe you. I didn't believe in the job, the people, the danger. I didn't want you to worry. You did more than that, Ava. You made me listen. This Monix, they hugged, for longer than they ever had before. I still make a mean pot roast, he said with a smile, and I hear billionaires like comfort food these days. Ava laughed through her tears. Only if it comes with cornbread. The next week, Ruth delivered her first public interview. Sitting across from a soft-spoken journalist, in a quiet studio bathed in warm light, she told her story not with bitterness, but with clarity. I wasn't buried under concrete, she said. I was buried under shame. My family's shame. Their greed. And when I tried to speak, they silenced me with signatures and sedatives. The interviewer asked, How did you survive? Ruth looked at the camera. Faith. And a voice inside me that said, Not yet. Not like this. The segment ended with her reading a passage from one of her old journals. One day, they will forget how to lie, and I will still know how to tell the truth. The clip aired nationwide. It became the most watched interview of the year. In the aftermath, Richard Blake faced a whirlwind of charges falsifying death records, unlawful detainment, wire fraud, abuse of fiduciary power. His mugshot flashed across every screen in America. For a man who had once spoken at economic summits and hosted senators, the fall was biblical. He was denied bail. During arraignment, he refused to speak. But he looked at the camera once, just once, and the rage in his eyes was pure venom. He had lost, not just control, but the narrative. The world no longer whispered in his favor. Back at the Blake estate, Ava stood on the balcony overlooking the grounds as Ethan approached. They've scheduled the community dinner, he said. We're turning the estate into a fundraiser. Local causes, scholarships, veteran housing. She smiled. Your mother would like that. She helped plan it. He handed her an envelope. Inside was a deed to a new home, in her name, near the estate, but not on it. I want you to have a place of your own, he said. No more guest house. No more borrowed space. She looked up, eyes shimmering. You're not trying to buy my forgiveness, are you? No, he said softly. I'm trying to honor the woman who taught me what loyalty means. A long silence passed. Then Ava said, You're getting there. He laughed. One day at a time? She nodded. One truth at a time. Oh, and together, they stood beneath the gold-washed sky, the echoes of the past behind them, and the shape of something new, something honest, rising before them. The church was old, not grand, not ornate, just a red brick chapel nestled between rows of pecan trees on the edge of Marietta, the kind of place where time moved slow and prayers carried weight. Inside, it was standing room only. Neighbors, reporters, former staff from the Blake estate, community leaders, even a few estranged cousins of the Blake family, all came to witness what had once been unthinkable. Ruth Blake testifying at a public forum, not in court, but in church. She stood behind a modest pulpit, her Sunday hat elegant but not flashy, a black scarf wrapped around her shoulders. Her eyes swept the pews, and she smiled soft, assured. I used to think silence was safety, she began, but silence is just a quiet kind of prison. Murmurs rippled through the congregation. I was hidden, forgotten, and yet I was alive. All that time, I listened to the wind, to birds, to nurses talking outside my door. I memorized voices I never saw. I counted footsteps in the dark. She paused, but the voice I remembered most was my son's. Ethan. When he was a boy, he used to sing off-key just to make me laugh, and when I stopped hearing that music, I knew something had gone terribly wrong. Ethan stood in the back, hands clasped in front of him, His throat was tight. Ava was beside him, steady and present. "I don't stand here today to curse those who wronged me," Ruth said. "I stand here to remind you that truth once found is a weapon, a light, a way home." Tears rolled down cheeks. Someone whispered, "Amen." I nodded," Ruth continued. "The woman who helped bring me back, Ava Jones. She didn't come with a badge. She came with kindness and courage." Ava lowered her head. "She saw me when no one else did, and that kind of seeing it changes the world." The crowd erupted in quiet applause. Later, as they left the church, an elderly man with a Vietnam vet cap approached Ava. His voice was gravel, but his eyes were soft. "Miss Jones," he said, "I've got a granddaughter. Wants to be a writer. I told her about you. Told her brave comes in all colors." Ava smiled, heart aching in the best way. "She's lucky to have a grandfather like you." "No, ma'am," he said. "I'm lucky she has a world with women like you in it." That night, Ethan and Ruth sat together on the back porch of the estate. The stars were bright cleaner, somehow, than before. "You know what I regret most?" Ruth asked. Ethan shook his head. "That I didn't fight harder when I was first locked away. That I trusted the people who swore they were family." "You survived," Ethan said quietly. "That's not weakness. That's warriorship." She reached over and took his hand. "You remind me of your father, sometimes. But softer. More aware." Ethan looked out at the yard. "Do you think he knew?" Ruth was quiet for a long time. Then, if he did, he looked the other way. Ethan nodded, the sting of that truth sharp but necessary. "Then I won't," he said. Meanwhile, in a white-collar detention facility outside of Richmond, Richard Blake sat alone in the visiting room. No family, no lawyers, just a man in a suit who didn't belong, Simon Voss. The ex-military security chief who'd once helped Richard hide Ruth now stared at him across the table. "You were sloppy," Simon said. "I was betrayed," Richard hissed. "No," Simon replied. "You thought loyalty meant fear, but you taught people how to hate you. And now, they've learned something stronger than fear." He stood up. "I'm cooperating with the investigation. So are your assistants, your financial advisor, even your ex-wife. You're out of allies." Richard leaned forward, voice low. "You helped me. I followed orders," Simon said. "That doesn't mean I'll burn with you." And then he left. Richard stared after him, alone for the first time in decades. In the days that followed, the Blake Foundation was renamed the Ruth Blake Center for Justice and Restoration. The announcement went viral. Donations flooded in. Scholarships were announced for women of color pursuing social work and journalism. Grants for families fighting conservatorship abuse. Community centers built in Ruth's name across Georgia. And Ruth? She didn't seek more stages. She walked gardens. She read to children at the library. She made gumbo on weekends. And sometimes, when Ava visited, they would sit on the porch in silence, just breathing, just being. One morning, Ava received a letter in the mail. Handwritten, no return address. Inside was a single sentence. "You were the thunder in a silent storm. Thank you." Below it, L. Ava folded the letter, heart full. "Let them call me a maid," she whispered. "But I know I moved mountains." It began with a knock on Ava's door, a quiet tap. Not urgent, almost uncertain. She had just finished watering the small herb garden outside her new home. The scent of mint and rosemary lingered in the crisp December air. She opened the door to find a courier holding a thick envelope. "For Miss Ava Jones," he said. Signed delivery. Ava signed, thanked him, and stepped back inside. The envelope bore the seal of a high-powered law firm in D.C. She set it on the counter, unsure whether to open it right away. The weight of it felt strange, like something permanent had just entered her life. She took a breath and sliced it open. Inside, a lawsuit, Blake v. Jones, filed by Richard's niece Cassandra Blake, the only surviving heir still clinging to the family's old power. The suit claimed Ava had manipulated a mentally fragile Ethan Blake, incited public defamation, and acted with malicious intent to defraud the Blake estate. Ava sat down hard. She reread every word. Her hands trembled. Later that morning, she drove to the estate and found Ethan in the garden. He was on his knees, planting winter flowers beside Ruth, who had insisted on learning how to care for chrysanthemums before she turned 80. Ava stood at the edge of the path, holding the letter. He looked up. The moment their eyes met, he knew something was wrong. He rose quickly, wiping his hands on a towel. "What is it?" She handed him the envelope. Ruth watched, her expression unreadable. Ethan read in silence. His face hardened. Then he looked at Ava. "I'll handle it." Ava's voice was low. "It's not just about the lawsuit. It's what it represents. They're still trying to silence the truth. And this time, they're using me as the scapegoat." Ruth stepped forward, placing a hand on Ava's shoulder. "They can't silence you," she said. "They're just trying to scare you. Like they did me. It's the last gasp of a dying beast." Ethan nodded. "We'll counter. Publicly and legally. Cassandra's name is still on some of the old trust funds. She's afraid. Afraid this family is turning into something decent." He turned to Ava. "You want to settle this quietly? Or fight?" Ava straightened. "We fight." That week, Ava held her own press conference on the steps of the community library Ruth had helped fund. She stood tall, not behind a podium, but surrounded by mothers, students, and elders who had followed her journey. "No one owns the truth," she began. "Not the wealthy, not the powerful. And certainly not a bloodline built on silencing women." Flashbulbs popped. "I will not apologize for uncovering what was hidden. I will not be intimidated into retreat. This lawsuit is not about me. It is about keeping old ghosts alive. But the world has already seen what they tried to bury." Behind her, Ruth stood proud. Ethan at her side. The community rallied. Within 24 hours, Ava's legal fund was fully crowdfunded by thousands of donors, many of them small. Letters poured in from people across the country. "You speak for those who have no microphone. You gave my daughter courage to leave her abusive employer. You're the reason I visited my mother again after 10 years. Meanwhile, Cassandra Blake's legal team floundered under pressure. The public outcry against the lawsuit was swift and merciless. Her lawyers quietly offered mediation. Ava refused. By the third week, the judge dismissed the case entirely, calling it a transparent act of retaliatory intimidation with no legal merit. The courtroom erupted in applause. Ava didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She simply exhaled for the first time in what felt like weeks. Afterward, she stood outside with Ethan. "You okay?" he asked. She looked up at the sky. "I don't want to be a symbol. I just wanted to do what was right." "You did," he said. "And now they can't touch you." "Tonight." She turned to him. "So what now?" "We rebuild," he said. "Not just the Blake name, the whole legacy. With truth, with service, with you." A long pause passed. Then Ava said, "Then let's do it. On our terms." That night, Ruth lit a candle in her bedroom and opened her journal. Her handwriting had grown steadier. The tremble in her hands lessened with each day of freedom. She wrote, "Today, Ava stood where no one expected her to stand. Against fear, against heritage, and she did not bend. In her, I see a reflection not of the girl I was, but the woman I prayed someone else might become. If legacy means anything, it's what we leave in the hearts of others. Ava's courage is now stitched into the heart of this country. And me, I'm not finished speaking." Back in his study, Ethan reopened a box he hadn't touched in years. It was his father's, the one filled with old letters, photographs, and notes from board meetings long past. Among the papers was a sealed envelope marked, "For Ethan. If I'm gone." He hesitated, opened it. Inside was a single sentence, "Trust your mother's voice over mine." Ethan blinked, then laughed quietly, and wept. The small auditorium at Spelman College was packed. Students filled every row. Faculty members lined the back walls. Journalists took notes, their cameras respectfully silent, knowing they were about to witness something rare. A living piece of American history was about to speak, not as a victim, not as a symbol, but as a woman whose voice had outlived the silence forced upon her. Ava sat in the front row, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She had helped organize the event, not because Ruth asked for it. Ruth didn't ask for much, but because the younger generation needed to see her, to hear her, to understand that resilience doesn't always roar. Sometimes, it waits. Then, the MC tapped the mic. Ladies and gentlemen, we welcome a woman whose story has shaken the nation. A mother, a survivor, a voice we almost lost. Ruth Blake. The applause rose like a wave, powerful and reverent. Ruth stepped onto the stage, her posture straight, her scarf deep purple, the color of royalty and bruises both. She stood at the center. No notes, no teleprompter. Just truth. When I was taken, she began, I was told I was unwell, that my mind couldn't be trusted, that everything I remembered was wrong. And when you hear that long enough, you start to wonder what if they're right. The room was silent. But then, someone shows up. Someone who doesn't know you, doesn't owe you, but sees you, really sees you. She looked at Ava, and suddenly, your voice finds its way back. A student near the front wiped a tear. I spent 15 years in a room that was technically clean, technically safe, and absolutely designed to erase me. But every day, I remembered who I was. Not because they let me, because I refused to let them take it. She paused. You don't need permission to be real. The crowd rose to its feet. This was no longer a speech. It was a sermon, a reclamation. Later, in a quiet side room, Ruth sat with a group of black female students. They crowded around her, peppering her with questions, some laughing, some serious, all respectful. Miss Ruth, one girl asked, how did you know who to trust? I mean, when everyone was lying to you? Ruth smiled softly. You watch how people treat the quiet things, like old folks, children, cleaning staff. If they act kind when no one's watching, that's a clue. Another girl asked, what do you do when the people hurting you wear the same last name? Ruth's eyes didn't flinch. You forgive when you're ready, but you don't excuse it, and you don't let the past chain your present. Was Noe. Ava listened quietly in the back, her chest tight with a pride so vast it almost hurt. This wasn't about headlines anymore. This was legacy, living, breathing, teaching. That weekend, back at the estate, Ethan received an unexpected call from the governor's office. Mr. Blake, the aide said, the governor would like to present your mother with a civilian medal recognition for her contribution to justice reform. Ethan looked out the window. Ruth was in the garden, pruning roses. She was humming softly. She'll appreciate the gesture, he said. But she's not doing this for medals. We understand. But the people want to thank her. He nodded. Then she'll accept. Not for herself. For the people like her who didn't survive. The ceremony was held at the state capitol. Press covered it. Lawmakers clapped. Ruth accepted the medal with grace, and a 2-minute speech that ended with, no award can give me back the years I lost, but if my story helps prevent even one person from being buried while alive, then every second of those years mattered. The applause was thunderous. She wore the medal once, then put it in a drawer beside her wedding ring, and never spoke of it again. Meanwhile, Richard Blake sat in his prison cell, watching the ceremony on a tiny television mounted in a corner. The image flickered, but the sound was clear. He watched as his mother stood tall, flanked by the governor and his son, the crowd clapping like it was church. He turned off the TV, lay back on the cot, stared at the ceiling. His face was blank, but in his fist, the bedsheet twisted tighter and tighter. 1 week later, Ava found a letter slipped into her mailbox. No return address. The handwriting was familiar, careful, controlled. Dear Ava, I do not expect forgiveness. I do not ask for it. But I must acknowledge that without you, the truth would have died in a locked room. You did what none of us, family, staff, advisors, had the courage to do. You saw her. Thank you. Ethan. She held the letter to her chest, closed her eyes, and smiled. That night, a small dinner was held at Ruth's home. Just family. A few close friends. No media. No speeches. Over fried chicken, cornbread, and iced tea. They laughed, cried, told stories. At one point, Ava leaned over to Ethan. Do you think it's over? He shook his head. The lawsuit? The media? Maybe. But the work? Never. Ruth raised her glass. To the work, they all clinked. And under that old southern moon, where truth had once been buried deep beneath shame, the Blake family finally stood on solid ground. The seasons turned. Winter softened its grip, and Georgia's early spring crept in through bare trees and warm breezes. The grounds of the Blake estate began to bloom again, daffodils, early dogwoods, tiny crocuses peeking through the mulch like they were testing the world's readiness for something gentle. Inside the main house, the dining room had been transformed not into a gallery of power or luxury, but into a living archive. Ruth's journals, old photographs, her volunteer certificates from before she vanished, all now carefully displayed under glass. At the center of the room sat her rocking chair, draped with the quilt she had stitched during the first year of her detainment. It's not a museum, she told Ava one afternoon. It's a memory room. Not just mine. Ours. Ava looked around, then pointed to an empty space on the wall. You know what would fit there? Ruth raised an eyebrow. A mirror, to remind everyone who walks in here that silence doesn't always come from being voiceless. Sometimes, it's the world that refuses to listen. I willed. Ruth smiled. That's why you were meant to find me. Meanwhile, Ethan had begun what he called the long apology, a tour of old partnerships, community groups, even union meetings his father once tried to squash. At a steelworkers' union in Savannah, he stood before a hall of skeptical men and women, mostly black, mostly older, many with memories of being silenced by someone named Blake. I can't rewrite what my father did, Ethan said, but I can give back what he took. We're funding legal clinics, we're restoring pensions, and we're listening finally. One of the union elders crossed his arms. You think money fixes trust? Ethan didn't flinch. No. But showing up every month for the next 5 years might start to. The elder studied him, then gave a slow nod. Then we'll be watching, Mr. Blake. Please, Ethan said. Just Ethan. Back at the estate, Ava began teaching free weekend classes for teenage girls. The group started small, just 5 at first, but grew with every story Ava told, every lesson she modeled. She called it the Seeing Project. It's not about changing the world, she told the girls. It's about seeing it clearly and choosing who you want to be, even when it costs you. One Saturday, she brought Ruth in as a surprise guest. The room lit up. One teen raised her hand. Miss Ruth. Were you scared? All the time, Ruth answered. But fear doesn't stop the truth. It just delays it. Another girl asked. What did it feel like to come back to the world? Ruth paused. Like learning to breathe again, but deeper. Like purpose. Later that evening, Ava walked the garden paths alone. The moonlight painted the hedges silver. She paused at the bench near the oldest tree, a sprawling pecan that had stood there longer than the estate itself. Ethan found her there, holding a small box. I've been thinking, he said. That always makes me nervous, she teased, glancing up at him. He smiled, then handed her the box. Inside was a necklace, simple, with a charm shaped like an eye. For seeing, he said. Not just others, yourself. Ava swallowed hard. I don't need gifts. It's not a gift, Ethan said. It's a thank you. For giving this family back its soul. She ran her fingers over the charm. I was never trying to fix the Blakes. I know, he said. You were just trying to help a woman who was hurting. And that's what saved all of us. They sat in silence for a while. Then Ava said, You ever think about what comes next? Not the lawsuits or the press. Just life? All the time, Ethan replied. But I don't want it to be about making things right anymore. I want it to be about being right. She turned to him. You're getting there. He looked at her. So are you. It was not. Elsewhere, in a small rehab facility upstate, Simon Voss, the ex-security chief who once kept Ruth locked away, sat with a counselor. He had voluntarily surrendered his license, was cooperating with investigators, attending therapy twice a week. I thought I was protecting the family, he said quietly. But I was protecting corruption, because it was clean and paid on time. The counselor asked, And what do you want now? Simon exhaled. To unlearn. To unlearn obedience without question. To unlearn power without mercy. To unlearn the idea that silence equals loyalty. As the estate's first spring bloom arrived, Ruth received an invitation in the mail. A commemorative garden was being planted in her honor at Spelman College, featuring flora native to the South, each chosen for symbolism. Magnolias for dignity, hyacinths for sorrow, camellias for endurance. She held the letter close to her chest. "I lived 15 years in a room with no windows," she whispered, "and now they want to name a garden after me." Ava heard her. "You earned every petal." At the dedication ceremony, students read passages from Ruth's journals aloud. Ava gave a short speech, and Ethan stood beside her, holding Ruth's hand the entire time. When it was Ruth's turn, she walked slowly to the podium, paused to smell the camellias, and smiled. "They tried to lock me in," she said, "but life finds cracks in every wall." The garden shimmered with applause. It was not revenge. It was not a comeback. It was a rooting. Ruth Blake had not simply returned to the world. She had replanted herself in it. Summer arrived early that year. The air in Georgia turned thick and sweet, carrying the scent of honeysuckle and cut grass. Cicadas hummed low in the trees. Life, for once, slowed down. Not the hurried, frantic silence of a cover-up, but the peaceful kind. The kind that follows storms when you know they won't return right away. In the estate's kitchen, Ruth was teaching Ava how to bake her famous blackberry cobbler. "No shortcuts," Ruth said, tapping Ava's wrist as she reached for the pre-made crust. "This family knows about shortcuts. Look where that got them." Ava laughed. "Fine. From scratch, you win." Ruth's hands were steadier now, her voice fuller. She moved with the grace of a woman who had finally outlived her ghosts. "I used to imagine this," she said softly, stirring the filling. "Being in this kitchen again. But I never thought it would be with you." Ava looked at her. "Do you miss it, the old days, before everything went wrong?" Ruth shook her head. "No, baby. The old days weren't good. They were quiet, but not kind. This right now, this is the life I wanted." They worked in comfortable silence, the kind that only exists between people who have walked through fire together. Outside, Ethan knelt in the garden, his sleeves rolled up, sweat on his brow. He was planting marigolds in a new corner they had designated for community use, a place where neighbors could grow vegetables, children could learn about soil, and no one had to ask permission. A little girl approached, holding a watering can almost as big as her torso. "Mr. Blake?" she asked shyly. "Can I help?" He smiled, handing her a small trowel. "Only if you promise to water the marigolds like they're royalty." The girl giggled and got to work. A few parents watched from the shade, whispering quietly. "That's him, right?" one asked. "The billionaire?" Another nodded. "Yep, and that's his mama, the one who came back, and the maid, the one who found her." "That's her, too, over there. Not a maid anymore." "No," the first woman said. "She's something else now, something more. With me, Dal." Later that evening, Ethan hosted a small gathering on the back lawn, just the core circle. Ruth, Ava, Lena Kavanaugh, the journalist, a few board members from the Blake Foundation, and a surprise guest, Judge Harper, the retired black judge who had quietly reopened Ruth's case after it was buried. Over sweet tea and grilled corn, stories were passed around. Laughter echoed through the trees. At one point, Judge Harper raised his glass. "To Ava Jones," he said, "who reminded us all that justice isn't always loud, but it is always listening." Ava blushed, but her voice was steady. "I didn't do it alone." "No," Ruth added, "but you were the only one brave enough to start." As the sun dipped below the trees, Ethan pulled Ava aside. They stood at the edge of the property, near the old magnolia tree that had stood through generations. "I've been thinking," he said. Ava raised a brow. "Again?" He chuckled. "We've built something here. Not just the foundation, a life, and I don't want to keep rebuilding it alone." He reached into his pocket. A small box. No speech, just an open heart. "Ava Jones, will you build the rest of this with me? Not as an employee, not even as a partner, but as family?" She stared at the ring, then at him, then she smiled. "I thought you'd never ask." The news of their engagement spread fast, but not in the flashy, scandalous way it might have once. Now, it was different. One headline read, "From Maid to Matriarch, the woman who rewrote a billionaire legacy." Another simply said, "Truth wins." A few weeks later, Ruth sat alone in the memory room, flipping through one of her old journals. She stopped on a page dated 12 years ago, written during her darkest days. "If no one ever finds me, I hope I at least left a crack, just enough for light to get in." She closed the book. The light was here now, flooding in, not just for her but for everyone they had touched. For the first time, Ruth Blake allowed herself to believe that peace wasn't a dream. It was earned, and it was here. Outside, Ava walked hand in hand with Ethan as the sun dipped low. Children laughed in the distance. Neighbors waved. The land felt alive. "Do you feel it?" Ava asked. Ethan looked around. "The quiet?" "No," she said. "The difference." He nodded slowly. "It's in the way they look at us now, like we're not ghosts, like we belong." She smiled. "We always did. They just had to see us." And in that golden evening light, beneath the tree where secrets once grew like rot, a new kind of root took hold, one built on truth, on love, and on the quiet things that last. The Blake estate was quiet again, not the kind of quiet that comes from absence, but the kind born of contentment, the soft hush of a house finally free of secrets. Windows open, curtains dancing in the breeze. Somewhere, a piano played a soft hymn one Ruth used to hum when Ethan was small. It was a Sunday. The morning sun streamed through the stained glass window in the newly converted reading room, casting colors onto the wood floors. Ruth sat in her chair, wrapped in a shawl, eyes closed, not sleeping, but remembering. Ava entered with 2 mugs of tea. "Chamomile," she said. Ruth opened her eyes. "You remembered. Some things are worth remembering." They sat in silence for a moment. "I've been thinking about writing it all down," Ava said. "Everything. From the beginning." "You should," Ruth replied. "Truth only lives if you tell it, but not as a scandal, not as a revenge story." "No," Ruth nodded. "As a homecoming." Downstairs, Ethan was in the study, sorting through the last boxes of his father's archived records. Most had already been donated to the State Historical Center, documented as part of the family's public reckoning. But this box was personal. Inside were photo albums, not the curated ones used at galas or magazine shoots. These were raw, blurry shots of Ruth laughing in the kitchen, a young Ethan playing in the mud, Ava's first week as a maid, caught in the background of a family picnic she wasn't invited to. "Until now," he smiled, flipped the page. There was one photo that made him stop. Ruth sitting under the old magnolia, Ava beside her, both unaware of the camera. 2 women, 2 timelines, 2 voices, 1 story. Outside, preparations were underway for something special, a dedication. The estate was opening part of the grounds to the public, a permanent community center and retreat space called The House That Listens. It would host survivors of systemic abuse, people recovering from wrongful detainment, and caretakers in need of rest. Workshops, healing gardens, story circles. Ava had designed the curriculum. Ethan funded it quietly, anonymously. Ruth approved every detail. "I don't want this to be about the Blakes," she said. "I want it to be about the people who were never invited through the front door." At the opening ceremony, Ava stood at the podium. Not nervous, not rehearsed, just real. "We once lived in a house that punished silence," she began. "Now we open a house that listens." She looked out over the crowd. Hundreds gathered, families, elders, survivors, students. "This is not a monument to wealth. It's a promise that your voice matters, that you are seen." She paused. "And that healing doesn't need permission." Thunderous applause followed. Ruth smiled from her chair, tears brimming. Ethan took her hand. "We did it," he whispered. "No, son," she said. "She did it. We just finally followed." That night, the 3 of them sat on the back porch, sipping sweet tea, wrapped in a shared peace that came only after long storms. The stars were clear. The trees swayed gently. Ava said, "Do you ever think about how easily this could have gone the other way?" Ruth answered, "Every day." Ethan leaned forward. "So, What made it go this way? Ruth looked at Ava. You. Then she turned to Ethan. And you. She looked up at the stars. And a God who doesn't forget us even when the world does. They were quiet after that. But it wasn't emptiness. It was gratitude. The deep kind. The kind that lasts. Months passed. Life continued. Ethan and Ava married in a quiet ceremony under the magnolia tree, just family, friends, and neighbors. No press, no spectacle, just vows, tears, and hands held tight. Ruth gave a speech. It was only one sentence. Justice without love is just another prison. Years later, children would walk through the house that listens and see a framed photo in the main hall. Ruth, Ava, and Ethan, 3 lives forever entwined by truth, by courage, by grace. They would ask, "Who are they?" And the guides would say, "That's the woman who was forgotten. That's the woman who found her. And that's the man who learned how to listen." And in that house, in that story, they would all remember. Some truths are louder than silence, and some homes are built not of bricks, but of voices finally heard. The story reminds us that true justice isn't always delivered in courtrooms or headlines. It often begins with one person choosing to see what others ignore. It teaches us that silence can be as cruel as violence, and that healing starts when we listen with compassion. Above all, it shows that even in a world built on power and secrecy, courage, truth, and love can still rewrite the ending.